Amelia, can you hear me? Thank you. Lisa, can you hear me? Good morning, Lisa. Can you hear me now?
And let's prepare to begin, please. Good morning. My name is Felicia Orth. I'm a hearing officer appointed by the New Mexico Water Quality Control Commission to conduct a hearing in the matter of proposed new rule 20.6.8, the New Mexico Administrative Code. The rule relates to supplemental requirements for water reuse, docketed by the Commission Administrator as WQCC 23-84. We are on the 8th day of hearing, and we have two public comment opportunities on the days that we are doing the hearing. This is the first of the two opportunities today. There'll be another opportunity at 1 p.m. and at 9 and 1 for each of the days we continue through the week. So just a few things about public comment. I will ask you to spell your first and last name for the transcript. I will ask you to swear or affirm that you will tell the truth. And I will be timing your comments. We have to limit comments to 3 minutes each. In the event you have more to say than can fit into 3 minutes, if you'll send your written comment to Pam Jones, it will be included into the record as though it were spoken. Now, the hearing is being interpreted between Spanish and English. Lisa, would you like to offer a statement?
Good morning. My name is Lisa O'Grady. I'm here in the hearing room, and I am handling the technical aspects. Online, we have federally certified court interpreter Betty Zeman and state certified court interpreter Amelia Cardena.
Thank you. So I have half a dozen names here. We'll begin with Pastor Erica Lee Simca. Pastor, I believe you're on the platform.
Good morning. Can
Good
you hear
morning.
me?
Yes, I can. Thank you. Would you spell your first and last name, please?
Sure. Erica, Erica, Lee, Lea, Simca, Simka.
Thank you. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I affirm.
Thank you. I'll start your 3 minutes now.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Erica Lee Simca, and I am a pastor, a parent, and a 2-time cancer survivor. In fact, right now I am living with chronic cancer and being carefully monitored by my oncologist at the UNM Cancer Center. When I heard about this proposal, honestly, I wondered if there was consideration or enough consideration about people like me, that is, people particularly sensitive to carcinogens and possible carcinogens in our own homes and backyards and in the state. Whenever I heard of the proposed action that we're talking about, I wondered if people like me had been taken into consideration, that is, cancer survivors and cancer patients, because we know that carcinogens are a significant player in the likelihood of cancer. It may not come up right away, but over an extended period of time and lots of interactions with those carcinogens, the risk of cancer increases. So if people like me are not being taken into consideration, or profit or convenience is more important than the health of people like me and the environment, I recommend that it be added to the budget, that there be a children's curriculum to explain this decision so that my child will understand. I am a parent, and my child will have to deal with whatever decisions are made by us now. I'm also a pastor, and in my professional training and my personal spirituality, the golden rule is essential: to do unto others what we would do unto ourselves, or to love our neighbors as ourselves. Every faith and spiritual tradition has some version of this. Mr. Rogers taught this for those among us who are purely secular. And so I ask you all who are making this decision to take into consideration people like me who are quite sensitive to carcinogens and already dealing with cancers, to the generations after us, including my children, to our own sense of ethics and spirituality on how we relate to our neighbors, human, animal, plant, and otherwise. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Emma Minks. Emma Minks.
Hi, my name is spelled EMMA. So Elvira, Mary, Anna, and then my last name is spelled MINCKS, which is Mary, Indigo, Nancy, Charlie, Kangaroo, and Samantha.
Thank you. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. I'll start your 3 minutes now.
Thank you. I wanted to come here to say that this is very important. I'm glad you are taking public comment, and I am also a cancer survivor. I was diagnosed with childhood cancer when I was 10. Every ounce of fresh drinking water is precious, and we cannot replicate clean drinking water or take it for granted. Once it is poisoned through radium, uranium, selenium, and other harmful compounds, there are no scientifically proven standards for treating it. No credible data exists because companies have not been able to show any safety. That is because these chemicals are poison, especially at the high amount proposed. They are not safe at any level, and the poison will come for all of us. There is zero benefit, in my opinion, to allowing this to be
Ms. Minks, hold on 1 second, please. You were breaking up just now. Would you repeat your last 2 sentences? Miss,
Did you hear?
I'm sorry.
What did you hear last?
No, we didn't. You know what helps often is to turn off your camera. There you go.
Yeah, is this better? Can you hear me okay?
Now we can. Thank you.
Thank you. So what I was saying is even Texas didn't want this treated waste. So I think it's worthwhile to consider why they don't want this treated water. I think also with my childhood cancer, that was caused from growing up hours away from a mine. The poison water still traveled as water does, and I was exposed to some of those same radioactive chemicals that would be included in the oil, gas, and fracking waste. I was diagnosed with a rare throat cancer when I was 10, and my parents were strapped with debt from my cancer treatments for years. If you give these companies an inch to interpret this ruling, they will take 10 miles. The law has to be more strict and be more clear because allowing willy-nilly water reuse from industry is not a viable option. Fracking waste will poison your children, no matter their location, ethnicity, or class. Don't sell New Mexico out. Don't sell your children's health. Write a better ruling. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Minks. Joe Christian.
Hi.
Oh, hello.
Um,
If you would please spell your first and last name for the transcript.
Yes, my name is Joe, J-O, Christian, Christian.
Thank you. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. I'll start your 3 minutes now.
Thank you. Thank you for taking public comment. I am coming to comment today as a resident of New Mexico for the last 27 years. I've been a resident of Santa Fe City and County, and I work with youth and families as a teaching artist and directed, pardon me, a beloved local community arts organization for many decades here. I'm also a member of Northern New Mexico Showing Up for Racial Justice, and I work in alliance with the Three Sisters Collective. I'm commenting today from the perspective of both personally as a parent and caregiver to future generations, and also as a settler who recognizes the need to listen to the voices of the indigenous people who have and continue to caretake this land for thousands of years. Pardon me, I'm having like a major allergy problem, so pardon my voice. The local indigenous communities are coming to you alongside youth leaders and environmental advocates because they all agree that this rule is not in the best interest of the land or the people. And I'm here to comment also, besides my personal comment, on behalf of our greater Northern New Mexico Surge membership, which is hundreds of other people who are expressing deep concern with the lack of foresight in this rule, which we firmly believe is not in the interest of current or future New Mexicans. We see produced water as a byproduct of a highly toxic and wasteful process that really should be brought to an end overall rather than given the green light. All of the produced water off the oil field, including any experimental, industrial, and demonstration reuse projects, should be prohibited unless and until proven standards exist for adequate protections for workers and community members and our future generations. We implore this commission to comply with the requirement that its rules are based in sound scientific evidence in order to protect public health and the environment. It is clearly evident that this rule, to me and to us, is a bailout of the oil and gas industry's waste problem. Instead of the state, the commission, you who are supposed to be representing the people, it feels like you're not holding the industry accountable for their waste or addressing the problem at its source, but rather you're helping them along by giving an extra solution. It feels like this rule authorizes risky and dangerous experiments to dispose of produced water through reuse and any process that produces 4 times the toxic waste than the product it's creating is probably an issue that needs to be addressed right there and not just keep trying to find a place to put the waste.
Ms.
It
Christian?
will impact us.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Marie Lindberg? Oh, you're in the room. All righty. Yeah, either one. You'll want to press the button so that the button is green. You would spell your first and last name.
Marie, Marie, Lindberg, Lin as in Nancy, D as in dog, B as in boy, ERG.
Thank you. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I'm sorry.
Do you swear or affirm to tell
Yes.
the truth?
Thank
Thank you. I'll start your 3 minutes.
I'm here to oppose the wastewater reuse rule as it has been proposed. No problem. This rule leaves the decision about what is safe for New Mexicans, our drinking water, and the water that feeds our ecosystems up to the gas and oil industries. It offers very little transparency for us to be able to hold oil and gas companies accountable or even understand the impact of produced wastewater on workers and communities who are exposed to it. In fact, there's very little research on this new way of doing things.
Ms. Lindberg, hold on. I'll stop your clock.
Yes.
That microphone seems kind of watery. Let's try that one. Go ahead.
Can you hear me better? Okay. Many of the chemicals in oil and gas wastewater are carcinogenic. Studies have shown that there is no safe level of exposure to some of these chemicals like benzene, one of the more than 1,100 chemicals and compounds that we've seen in fracking water. Loopholes in state and federal law mean we don't even know what most of these chemicals are. Only 14% of them have been even adequately assessed for health impacts. And some of them are PFAs, forever chemicals, which means they're bioaccumulative, as in they build up in our body and we can't get rid of them. They last for centuries in our environment. Yet the proposed rule contains no minimum standards for treatment, handling, or disposal of the waste that leaves the fields. Over the last decade in Texas, oil and gas companies have pumped at least 43,000 pounds of PFAs into more than 1,000 fracking oil and gas wells across the state. The EPA has proposed drinking water standards for only 6 of the more than 15,000 PFAs we know of. If the companies don't have to tell us what is in the wastewater, we can't rely on them to keep us safe. Workers will be exposed to the water and have no way of knowing what they are being exposed to. The rule includes a provision on spills, presumably to reduce our access to this toxic water, but it's to handle them the same way we have been. And there are already an average of 4 toxic spills from oil and gas per day in New Mexico. We don't have any means to hold them accountable, and they have shown that they are more than willing to use their power and money to cover up the facts. In 1979, an Exxon study commissioned by Exxon said that burning fossil fuels will cause dramatic environmental effects in the coming decades, and they buried that research. The science continued to come out, but we found 4 decades later was they were conducting a systemic organized campaign by Exxon and other oil companies to sow doubt about science and prevent meaningful action on those environmental effects. And they're still doing that. We can't rely on gas and oil companies to keep us safe. We count on you to keep us safe. The commission should instead approve a clear rule that states no person shall discharge, dispose of, or reuse treated or untreated produced water off of the oil field, the least you can do. The department shall deny certification of any federal permit proposing to discharge, dispose of, or reuse treated or untreated produced water off of oil fields. Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy to.
Anita Amstutz, I believe I see Ms. Amstutz on the platform. And while I'm accepting Ms. I see her.
And yes.
Hello.
Do you see me?
No, I can
Hello.
hear you. Thank you. And while I'm accepting Ms. Amstutz's comment, if you are on the platform and would like to make comment during this session, please put something in the chat. So Ms. Amstutz, if you would spell your first and last name, please.
I see a picture for me. I don't know if you see me on the platform, but
It's better actually if we just hear your voice. It's better for connectivity.
okay, sure. My name is Anita, Anita Amstutz. A, M as in moon, S as in sun, T, U, T, Z.
Thank you. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I affirm, yes.
Thank you. I'll start your 3 minutes.
Thank you for taking comments. My organization that I founded is called Think Like a Bee, and we do advocacy and education around bee habitat and bee protection in the state of New Mexico, having successfully passed resolutions to protect bees in Albuquerque. Bees are critically endangered and they're absolutely necessary for our food system. They are the canaries in the mine for human health when it comes to clean air, water, and soil. Native bees, which there are over 1,000 native bees in the great state of New Mexico, are ground nesting. They pollinate 3 times more effectively than honeybees, and they cannot tolerate industrialized or produced water or any byproduct of this industry near agricultural areas or even roadsides where they nest and pollinate native habitat. In the last century, we know that produced water and any waste from the oil and gas industry, as has been talked about by others, contains PFAS and heavy metals that cause neurological damage such as lung, bladder, kidney, and skin cancers. Elevated levels of radium and radioactive compounds migrate to sensitive body organs such as bones, liver, and breast. How do we know this? Thanks to endless studies that have been done by public health and medical peer-reviewed studies from Pennsylvania to Texas to Colorado to New Mexico that find that the risks are endless to human communities and all living beings. We are poisoning ourselves. So I ask you an ethical question. Why would we even hesitate to make strict rules that protect our water and ensure our health and welfare of all living life and our precious water? And in this high desert region, we are water starved, let's face it. So you as a commission have the power to create a waste rule that holds the oil and gas industry liable for their fracking, accountable to the communities of New Mexico to deal with their wastewater in a responsible way. Why would we hesitate to do that? Another moral question is, in a time of record profits, why would those in the halls of power, all the way to the governor's office, appear to be so far from not even to listen to the suffering of people and living beings that live and work near the fracking fields and this industry in the south of our state and also near Farmington? I ask you to do the right thing. It is the moral and ethical imperative. For centuries, those who went before us in New Mexico kept our waters intact, so we have clean water to drink in the 21st century. But I ask a question, will we be the generation to wipe out clean water? To destroy the land base that supports us? By bowing to the oil and gas industry who want us to forget that because they give us profits. They give us endless profits as well as profligate waste. So the people of New Mexico do not want toxic water dumped into any of our rivers, onto our agricultural regions, on our waysides of our roads, or in our soil. Water is life, as people have said before. It cannot be returned to its pure and pristine state. And we need water to sustain life on this planet and in this state. And once it is
Ms.
destroyed,
Amstutz.
it is gone. Thank you.
Thank you. Cole Martin.
Good morning. My name is Cole, Cole Martin, Martin.
Thank you. Do you
That's
swear
it.
or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes.
Thank you. I'll start your
Um,
3 minutes.
Yate bene Nicole Martin Yanisha Techini Nishla Kiasani Bushes Chin Chisha Dushache Kiasani Dushanele. Good morning, everyone. I introduced myself in Dinepazad, which is the Navajo language. My maternal clan is red running into the water, and so therefore, matrilineally, I'm a water clan. I volunteer with Three Sisters Collective, and this morning it's been pretty emotional listening to the public comment because this is like real life. This is tangible. This is 3D. This is not something that's two-dimensional. And I hope that we can continue to see that this is our reality. Earlier there was a conference, a water conference, and there were Maori relatives from New Zealand that saw our water, that saw the Rio Grande, and they said, no offense, but this water is sick. And then a Sleda relative told them their traditional word for the Rio Grande includes crystal water. You think about the generations it has taken for the Rio Grande to not even be the Rio Grande. And you think about water contamination. I attended college at Fort Lewis in Durango, Colorado, and I was there during the Gold King mine spill in 2016. And to see the water turn yellow like it was something out of a Willy Wonka movie was so disheartening. We're coming up on almost 10 years in 2026 that spill happened. The Animas River joins with the San Juan River up in the Four Corner areas where Farmington and Shiprock are. And those people, when the spill happened, didn't get help. They didn't get help for their livestock. We had to coordinate mutual aid to take them clean drinking water. I urge you to deny this proposal, to think about the future. You can't drink oil. You can't drink money. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Martin. Was there anyone else? Let's have in the chat.
Yeah, we just said.
Okay. Is there anyone else in the room who would like to offer comment? Ma'am, come on up, please. I think that's the better microphone.
My name is Stephanie Camfield, spelled STEPHANIECAMFIELD.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes.
Start your 3 minutes.
I'm grateful to be here today on Ogopoge, the homeland of the Tewa people. Stephanie Camfield, Jehovah Girls. Eshtongo. I'm Stephanie Camfield. I'm a Muskogee woman. I'm a clinical social worker in tribal and rural communities in the state. I'm asking each one of you to listen with your heart. There's science to back up what we're saying. My relatives have explained that this morning. And my sister just talked about the firsthand experience of the water being contaminated. Each and every one of us depends on fresh, clean, pure water for our health and our well-being, for our absolute life. I'm here today to support OWA. That's water in my language, and this earth, and each one of us to have a healthy life. For the little ones that are yet to be born, to be healthy. We have a responsibility to protect that, to ensure it for generations to come. The way this rule is written, water's going to be contaminated. It's already been proven. We have an opportunity to stop it right now. Like Nicole said, we can't drink oil. We can't grow our food with oil. It's not worth it. Nothing's worth it. We absolutely have to have clean water. And whatever you all do, I pray that you make sure that is primary. There's no safeguards to protect these oil field workers. You know, it's an unsafe occupation as it is. And now it's going to be worse. This produced water is hazardous waste. There's no way it can be clean. No way. So once again, please remember, water is sacred. All our lives depend on it. Our children, our grandchildren, our communities, our elders, everybody. This water is a bioweapon. It's a bioweapon. And you have a responsibility to stop it right now. Maro.
Thank you, Ms. Canfield. Is there anyone else in the room here to offer public comment? The next public comment session will be at 1 p.m. today. Thank you all. We'll return to the technical case.
Madam Hearing Officer, can I make a comment?
Yes, sir.
I'd like to remind everyone that's participating is there are 3 types of water reuse that are contained in the proposed rule. Produce water, which has been almost the exclusive focus of the hearing, industrial wastewater, and municipal wastewater. I think it would be real helpful to me as a commissioner to hear how both the technical witnesses as well as the public feels about reusing the other types of water. Municipal wastewater, domestic wastewater, and industrial wastewater. So if you have opinions about that, that would be most welcome to me. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Nanasi? I believe we begin this morning with Ms. Nanasi and her witness, Dr. Van Gogh. Is that correct?
Yes, Madam Sir. Good morning. My name is Marian Lanassi on behalf of New Energy Economy.
Sorry, I think we need you closer to the microphone. And the other microphone seemed to be better this morning, but
Do you want me
to
move over there?
What do you think?
The witness is on the screen. We could just have a minute. Good morning, Dr. Van Gogh. Nice to see you.
Good morning.
Could the hearing officer, Madam Hearing Officer, would you please swear in the witness?
Yes. Dr. Bengosh, if you would please spell your first and last name for the transcript.
My name is Avner, Avner, Vengosh, Vengosh.
Thank you. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Nanasi. And doctor, if you would make sure that you are keeping your voice up.
I will try to. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, it's just a little low, but it's okay right now.
Okay, it's in
Madam Hearing Officer, may we ask the court administrators if they can turn this sound up, or is it up all the way? Okay, Dr. Bengosh, did you prepare rebuttal testimony?
Yes, I did.
I think it was because both of them were on. And New Energy Economy designated your rebuttal testimony as Exhibit 6. Is that correct?
Yes.
If I were to ask you the same questions that appear in New Energy Economy Exhibit 6 today, would you give the same answers?
Yes, I would.
Can you please provide a brief summary of your professional and educational experience?
So first of all, thank you for having me today. I am a distinguished professor of environmental quality at the Nicholas School of Environment at Duke University, North Carolina. I'm also the chair of the Division of Earth and Climate Sciences as part of the Nicholas School of Environment at Duke University. I'm a fellow of the Geological Society of America, GSA, and of the International Association of Geochemistry. In 2019, 2020, and 21, I was recognized as one of the Web of Science highly cited researchers, meaning that many have cited my research. I have also served as an editor of the journal GeoHealth and the editorial board of the journal Environmental Science and Technology. I have published thus far 180 scientific paper, peer-reviewed paper in leading international journal, including, which I like to emphasize, 34 scientific papers directly addressing the potential impact of oil-produced water, flowback water from fracking, and their impact on the environment. So my qualifications are fully explained by my rebuttal testimony, which today, including my curriculum vitae, which is as part of my documented and also exhibit AV2, which are a list of the specific publication that have published on oil-produced water.
And sir, you served as the editor of GEOHEALTH. Is that correct?
Yes, I just been editor for that for the last 2 years.
And your curriculum vitae and your list of publications are respectively Exhibit AV1 and AV2 of your rebuttal testimony. Is that correct, sir?
Yes.
Could you please provide a summary of your testimony?
Okay, so for my extensive and long-term, I think over 20 years, research on the chemistry of oil-produced water and flowback water that's coming from hydraulic fracturing across the US and basically also in China, including studying the oil wastewater from the Permian Basin. I can clearly testify that the use of oil-produced water without adequate treatment, which cause numerous environmental effects and would contaminated soil and water by a wide range of organic, inorganic, which are metals, heavy metals, and radioactive material for decades to come. In addition, that would pose human health risks on the individual associated with all wastewater and the impacted areas. Numerous studies, scientifically and peer-reviewed studies, including my own research, which you can see in Exhibit AV2, have shown that all produced water contains elevated level of toxic of organic chemical, salt, very high level of salt, metals, and contaminants such as ammonium and radium nuclide, which are extremely toxic for the ecological system, which meaning they bioaccumulate into ecological system, and also obviously human health. In addition to direct contamination of water resources that could be impacted by spill or even discharge of treated oil-produced water, and that's very important because we have evidence in different states that even if you consider water to be treated, they still have severe impact on the environment. For example, high level of radioactive elements such as radium nuclide in all produced water induces risk for the accumulation of this radioactive element in the soil in the case of using of the oil produced water for irrigation, or streams in the case of disposal of treated oil wastewater. And we have scientific evidence that this disposal of this even treated oil wastewater and has caused high level of radioactivity accumulation of the sediments in these places, in the outfall site, in the river where the wastewater had been discharged. The treated wastewater was discharged because of the high level of the salinity and the high level of other contaminants of oil-produced water. And I would like to emphasize that even when we conducted the studies, we were like, I would always describe ourselves like being in a cave, in the dark, because what we are using, we're looking at specific contaminants, like I mentioned, radium, I mentioned ammonium, which are extremely toxic to the aquatic life. But there are many hundreds of other contaminants in oil-produced water that we don't know about it. We just recently have a study that showed there are PFAS component in wastewater that's coming from oil-produced water. So the level of understanding, even in peer-reviewed study that I was participating, is basically negligence many other constituents that are in the wastewater that from oil and gas production that we're not really aware of. So that's something very important to be when you move forward with the management of oil-produced water. And specifically in the Permian Basin has been shown that it's contained all this level of contaminants that I mentioned, which they're released to the environment, no doubt, would cause environmental damage. Now, emphasizing the reuse rule that we are dealing here today, including ambiguous language like appropriate treatment for possible reuse of oil-produced water, without specification of the treatment method, and without including comprehensive management plan for addressing the waste that will be generated from the treatment system. This is something that the committee have to understand. When you treat water, you have two streams. One is what the clean one that generated as the product, but also you generating a waste. And the waste would contain orders of magnitude higher level of contaminants from the oil and gas. They would contain high level of salt, high level of metals, heavy metals, and high level of radioactivity. And in some studies that published recently, it has been shown that the actual treatment itself induces a new types of organic contaminants that were not generated in the raw oil and gas material. So all this waste stream, which is becoming extremely high level of contaminant, and in some cases will need to have a special license for disposal because of the high level of radioactivity, need to be managed and need to be addressed in any ruling for oil and gas wastewater. So that's really important that the committee take into consideration. In a best case scenario, for example, when we're talking about desalination, such as reverse osmosis or other treatment method as direct osmosis or thermal desalination or membrane technology that had been mentioned in the literature, they all demonstrated that it would generate highly saline and high contaminated wastewater stream that, as I mentioned, would require special management and removal. The absence of clear indication of the treatment technology in the new reuse rule and specific water quality standard as condition for our ability to use and the implementation of the new reuse rule could generate numerous environmental issues, which would require high economical costs for future generation of these activities. And without specification of the treatment and the standard, this rule is not scientifically based. Without credible scientific data to base regulation on, any reuse application would cause undue risk. Any demonstration project or industrial project, so-called, that mentioned in the reuse rule would adversely impact human health and the environment and will cause impaired waterways to be destructive and for generation to come. That is kind of one of the things that are important, and I think to emphasize that we can back all my testimony with actual scientific evidence conducted in my lab and conducted for many other labs. So I'm joining a huge scientific community that has demonstrated those facts, and it's not coming from kind of specific or personal point of view. I think that is really important to emphasize. This is representing the updated science that we know about oil produced water.
Dr. Bangosh, before you go on, I want to just ask you about something that you've just spoken about, and if you could elaborate. You said something that I think is really important for the commission to consider. And it was about that there's two streams that result from any kind of treatment. One is, could you just explain those streams, actually, distinguish them, and explain the importance of having rules in place that govern what happens to the residual?
Okay, so when given the complexity of oil produced water, which contain, as I mentioned, a wide range, some people argue hundreds or thousands of organic compounds, a wide range of metals, heavy metals, and high salinity, high level of nutrients like ammonium, which is extremely toxic, and as I mentioned, radionuclide, which are extremely toxic. The treatment of oil produced water would require a wide range of treatment technology. It couldn't be one treatment that could be addressing all components. When you treat for organics, which has been the major routine process for oil produced water, which was shown to be inadequate, they were aiming to get rid of the organic component in oil produced water, the hydrocarbons that we all know exist in high concentration in oil produced water. And what they do, they try to oxidize the organic matter, trying to convert it to CO2 that go into the atmosphere And therefore, they thought that this kind of treatment would resolve the problem. But evidently, because of the complexity and because of that many of the organic, I'm still in the focus of the organic, are very non-degradable, the ability to just oxidize them has failed. So basically, when we're talking about inorganic, any treatment of waste, and including domestic wastewater that we perhaps talk about it in a few minutes ahead, that mentioned by the Commission, any treatment of water generate residual material, and that is the two waste streams that I mentioned. Specifically, when we're talking about inorganics, they are not degraded. They are removed from one stream to another. And when they remove one stream to another, you generate a salt, a high level of saline contaminated wastewater that is generated from the treatment itself. Now, the treatment itself, for example, let's talk about the very common desalination of seawater that is all around the world. So in this process, you take seawater, you convert it into a drinking water, but you're generating a brine, which is about 5 to 10 times saline than seawater. But because of the location near the sea and because of the salt has very similar chemistry of seawater, this saline stream is being back into the ocean, into the sea, and there are some debate about its impact, but basically this is kind of ability to reuse or to desalinate seawater because of the proximity to the ocean and ability to discharge the brine back to the ocean. But when we're talking about oil-produced water, which has the salinity to begin with 5 to 10 times higher than seawater, and then when you're doing desalination or any other method of treatment, you would generate this highly, it will be something like 20, 50 times of the salinity of seawater. And of course, the better treatment technology, meaning higher concentration of contaminant in the saline stream. And then and of course, the radionuclide, which already very high in the oil-produced water, will becoming enriched in those saline streams. So what do you do with it in the central part of New Mexico? You can obviously inject it back to the deep injection wells if you can, but you need to be sure that the management of this stream, it doesn't have any way to escape to the environment and have no way. Also, one have to be worried about the health of the people working in there because of the high level of the radiation that can be induced from this waste. So in any rule, any of the contaminants, and we're talking about a long list of contaminants in oil-produced water, should be addressed in part of the treatment method and should be addressed as part of what is the concentration that you expect to be in the end of the process to be able to reuse. And then at the same time, you need to address how you manage and work with the highly radioactive, and highly contaminated stream that are being generated because of this treatment.
Thank you, sir. And could you tell us what the second main objection you have to the rule is, other than the fact that there's no scientific standards to back up this rule? What is the second major point you have?
Well, the second is addressing the testimony of being conducted by NMOGA witness bulge. Bulge testimony argues that so long as produced water satisfies water quality standard, it should not be treated differently than other water. I'm saying that this statement is fundamentally incorrect. As you're aware, produced water contains a large range of toxic, organic, and inorganic chemicals, including radioactive material. Any of those chemical compounds are not included in the water quality standard and that were designed to address primarily marginal water from domestic wastewater. Therefore, following the water quality standard alone would not address the risk induced from oil produced water and would cause severe contamination and human health impact upon the implementation of this new ruling. We cannot, and that's something very important, I think, the message to the committee, we cannot lump together domestic wastewater rules with produced water rules. There are two very different classes of water, classes of contaminants, classes of treatment technologies that are needed to be addressed. And therefore, putting them together as the general term of produced water is misleading and actually a very kind of a dangerous path to move on.
In 2019, you had a master's student working with you named Carly Osborne, correct?
Yes.
She performed a master's project investigation under your supervision. Is that also true?
Yes.
Can you tell us about that particular project?
Sure. First of all, as part of my research, I have been the last 20 years that I've been in Duke University. I have numerous graduate students and working in my lab. Our lab is one of the most advanced lab in the US. We have a wide range of analytical tools that enable us to measure water chemistry, water quality. We also measure isotope fingerprint of wastewater. We've been working extensively on other issues related to coal and coal ash. That is a major issue in many states across the US, and basically develop what we call fingerprint, geochemical fingerprint that enable us to understand and to identify contaminants. And it's important that to mention that Osborne, my master student, was part of this work, and she investigated the water quality of produced water generated from unconventional oil exploration in the Permian Basin. And she was looking at the treated water generated from a treatment site. And as part of the study, she collected 15 water samples that were collected in Chile Telepin recycling plant in Pesos in Texas.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt, but could you just spell the name of that
Sure.
recycling plant? Thank you so much.
No worries. It's CHILTEPIN recycling plant in Pesos, PECOS. And
that's in Texas, right? In the Permian Basin?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
No worries. So the idea was to analyze wastewater prior and after the treatment, which involved temporary storage of the oil-produced water in open reservoir. And it's managed with continuous treatment of aeration and then put it into a pit. So the idea is to try to get rid of the organics in the oil-produced water, which is, as I mentioned, one of the common way of treating oil-produced water, but trying to get rid of the organic matter. The water sample were analyzed in my lab, Van Gogh lab in Duke University, and we analyzed for major element and dissolved organic carbon. And the data showed that similar to many other studies, the Permian produced water is highly saline. It's about 1.4 times the salinity of seawater, with high concentration of ammonium. It's what we measured was 175 milligram per liter. Just to give you a concept, that the standard for starting to affect aquatic life is 0.3 milligram per liter. And we measure 175 milligram per liter, which is very common among produced water. We measure high boron, which 50 milligram per liter. Boron is important because it will affect plant. So when you're using for agriculture, it will cause toxicity for the plant. And this is a very important constituent that affect the ability for you using produced water. It will basically destroy any agriculture, and there is a lot of data and publication on that. And it's also contained very high concentration of dissolved organic carbon at 220 milligram per liter. The kind of ironic thing that the data showed that even the treated water that after this system was indistinguishable than the what called the raw water. So basically the treatment did nothing. And basically if you take this treated water and put it into land or reuse it, you would cause a major ecological damage and would contaminate it, severely contaminated water resources. So for us, this was like, hey, this is what we call treated wastewater. But in fact, we see that the treatment, the attempt for treatment is not adequate. In fact, it does nothing. And this is consistent with other research we conducted in Pennsylvania when people try to use all produced water in domestic wastewater treatment plant and then discharge it into the river. And we found that the wastewater treatment that when you're using it for just domestic sewage, actually doesn't do anything for the oil produced water. It doesn't remove the salt. It doesn't remove the radioactivity. It may slightly remove the organics, but one of the another important point is that the high salinity of the oil produced water would damage the ability of any sewage treatment plant, because the bacterial composition of active sludge, this is the method used for treatment of domestic wastewater, would be damaged by the high salinity that is coming from oil produced water. So basically, introduction of oil produced water into a common wastewater treatment plant in New Mexico would make those wastewater treatment plants inadequate and would reduce the ability to remove the simple organics that we know that occur in domestic sewage. So those two streams of oil produced water, as first of all demonstrated that the common treatment of just putting them in an open pit and trying to have oxidation of the organic doesn't work. And basically any attempt in other states, as I mentioned, and using the wastewater treatment facility would cause major damage. And this is, again, demonstrated in those studies.
And sir, that information is in your rebuttal testimony, is it not?
Correct.
Thank you, Dr. Van Gogh, for providing a summary of your rebuttal testimony. Do you have anything that you would like to proffer in Sir rebuttal testimony, specifically as it regards the testimony of Mr. Tischler, who provided rebuttal testimony for NMOGA?
Yes, I've read Tischler's testimony carefully, and I have several comments. First of all, he argued that the NMED has not been scientifically justified for the prohibition of the reuse or discharge of treated produced water to surface and groundwater of the state. This is totally untrue because there are many scientific publications, and I can specifically the publication of my group, which are part of my testimony. I can highlight papers number 1, number 2, number 3, 7, 9, 11, 13, 16, 17, 19, 23, 24, 25, 27, 29, 31, 33, and 34 in the list of publications that we published, and I apologize for the long list, showing clear evidence for contamination. And this is published in peer-reviewed scientific journals. It's not my personal view. It is demonstrated, and it's being accepted by the scientific community. So this type of scientific base exists, and showing that the high salinity of all produced water across the state, the country, and explicitly in the Permian Basin, that this strong science supported the simple fact that discharge of oil-produced water without very extensive treatment would cause a major environmental and human health impact.
Before you go, before you go on, I just want to ask you, could you explain the difference? Like, what is important about science and the methodology that's inherent in science versus just sort of, oh, a little experiment over here or there with shoddy paperwork? Like, could you contrast that?
Sure. It's kind of, so when, interesting question. So when we work on different issues, like going to a site and seeing, oh, some people think that there is contamination of the water. What we do, we try to look in a very objective way. We try to eliminate any personal agenda, any personal thought. And I'm trying here in my testimony today to eliminate any issues about climate change, about oil, trying to focus on the fact. And that's what we're trying. So when we are, for example, there is a stream in Pennsylvania that people saying, hey, this might be contaminated by wastewater. So we go to the site. Typically, it will be a PhD student that all his life is depending on that. Typically, we don't get funding from any agency that is part of the system. We get it from NSF, National Science Foundation. They're trying to look for the science, not trying to have any agenda of finding or not finding contamination. And then we conduct, first of all, the field work. We collect water sample of the upstream, trying to characterize how the river look like. It could be talking about groundwater. So we're talking how groundwater away from any spill site will look like. And we characterize their chemistry, we characterize the isotope composition. We're doing very comprehensive work. And then we go to the contaminated site and again, analyze it, typically trying to analyze it over time and analyzing. So we're looking at also special variation away from the site, away from the apparently contaminated site. Sometimes it's easy because you see the pipe and you see the pipe discharging oil-produced water, so you measure that as well, so you can have the contaminated source. And then we analyze all those waters in the lab. It takes time. We analyze it for, as I mentioned, for salt, for metals, for radioactivity. Some other labs measure it for all the organic constituents. And as I mentioned, more and more studies are revealing more wide range of organic contaminants, very toxic, some of them. And then once we got this data, we start to publish it, and publishing it is writing a paper which is submitted to a journal. We trying, or many of the journals that mentioned here are the top journal in the field. The editor of the journal would have first evaluation of the paper, trying to see if it's there's no typos or there are no issues in that, and then it's sending to reviewer. Sometimes you get 3, sometimes you get 5, sometimes you get 7 reviewers, independent scientists who are looking at every sentence in the paper, and their role is basically to find mistakes, to challenge the text, challenge the authors in any possible way. And typically the paper, after the revision, sometimes they reject the paper because the paper is not adequately satisfied them. In other cases, they send it back to the authors to have revision. And the authors have to address specific comment. And then it's kind of going back. And then after another round of revision, the editor have the authority to look at the reviewers' comments, compare them. Sometimes they also bias and try to build the consensus and then accept or not accept the paper for publication. So this is a very tedious process. It's not as simple when you write a report, industrial report, that you writing it and submitting it. This is a process that is peer reviewed by other people. For example, if there are studies coming from the US Geological Survey, not only it's being peer reviewed by in the journal system, it's peer reviewed within the Geological Survey community. So they have another layer of evaluation. So basically, any paper that is published in a good journal, there are some other journals that they're not as good, but the top journals require a really a tedious kind of a process from which by the end, I can comfortably say that this is kind of the way science see the different topics that we're discussing.
Thank you so much. And now if you could return back to your rebuttal of Mr. Tischler.
Right. The second point of Mr. Tischler was that domestic wastewater is currently treated and discharged in enormous volume worldwide, and therefore, why not to use that kind of produced water from oil and gas that are kind of similar. We know the constituent, we know they have biological agent, and therefore should be treated kind of equally. And that is really, statement is totally incorrect. I can give up to the number, the salinity or TDS of all produced water in the Permian Basin is between 30,000, which is above seawater, to a little bit seawater is about 20,000. So to about 200,000, 6 times of seawater in much of the Midland Basin and also in the Delaware Basin. Some cases up to 400,000 milligram per liter. This level is kind of totally different from what we're talking about domestic wastewater, which is about 1,000 milligram per liter which is 20 to 400 times lower than the salinity. I'm talking only salinity of oil produced water in the Permian Basin. The comparison between oil produced water that contain, as we mentioned, various mineral salts, different types of heavy metal, oil and hydrocarbon, volatile and semi-volatile organic compounds, that many of them are not biodegradable, unlike domestic wastewater. Radionuclide, ammonium, the hydraulic fracturing additive, and also PFAS, as demonstrated in a new study by Jiang et al. 2022 in the Permian wastewater suggests that this comparison between domestic wastewater, which has a known and very, very low level of contaminants, cannot be compared to the chemistry, the complexity of oil produced water from that we know the difference between domestic wastewater and the treatment that's required is not really coming close to what you would need to treat oil and gas wastewater, specifically from the oil produced water. The next point that I would like to mention about the testimony that of Mr. Tischler, he mentioned that other states, including Texas, Oklahoma, Colorado, and Wyoming, have issued NPDES permits for produced water discharge. And therefore, why cannot do it also in New Mexico? Well, this is a really kind of, I would make sure the committee is aware that in those states, the produced water is generated primarily from coal bed methane, not from oil produced water, which has much lower salinity, metals, and radioactivity, and much lower potential environmental and human health impact. It's important for the committee to be aware that I published a book on that. I'm not trying to advertise my book in this comment, but the point that I'm trying to make that we have addressed all the chemistry of oil produced water, of produced water coming from coal bed methane. And we specifically for all possible contaminants in all those mentioned states. So I can clearly provide evidence based on the data that generated and presented in my book that the comparison between those produced water to what we are addressing here in New Mexico is totally incorrect. Another kind of points related to that, related to domestic wastewater, which I think it's an interesting thing that it mentioned by Mr. Tischler that reclamation of domestic water that contain more known and unknown constituent than produced water, which is totally neutral to drinking water standards, is demonstration the fact that technology exists can treat some source of produced water to acceptable level of reuse and discharge. This is really misleading statement because there's no comparison, as I mentioned, between the chemistry of domestic wastewater that typically contain known organic matter in much lower concentration, nutrient and bacteriological constituent. And there's no comparison to that to the chemistry of oil produced water from the Permian Basin. So I think this is a very clear indication that the notion that you say, hey, we have been treating wastewater, domestic wastewater, why not we continue doing it for oil produced water is to say gently is misleading because we're talking about a totally different waste or stream. And just to mention to the committee that even domestic wastewater that has been treated generated the residual that I mentioned, what's called active sludge. And the sludge solid that being generated from domestic wastewater treatment is becoming a major environmental problem in the US. What to do with this sludge, which is enriched in nutrients and some and bacteria, and putting it as a fertilizer that been suggested and been tested in some state has shown to be devastating for the quality of groundwater underlying those agricultural sites. So even domestic wastewater generates waste, generated this what we call solid sludge, and challenging what to do with it. And we're talking about a totally much kind of lower concentration of salt, organics, and so on. So basically, this comparison and the notion that we know how to treat it is basically incorrect and wrong. I think I would stop here.
Okay, thank you. Madam Hearing Officer, on behalf of New Energy Economy, I move admission of Exhibit 6.
That was, I believe, Dr. Van Gogh's testimony.
Correct.
All right.
His rebuttal testimony, to be specific.
Are there objections? Exhibit 6 is admitted.
Thank you. It's 10:20. Mr. Dr. Van Gogh is available for examination. I don't know what your pleasure is about taking a break or not.
Yeah, I think this would be a good time for a break. We'll take 15 minutes and come back to commission questions at 10:35.
So Dr. Van Gogh, we're going to take a break for 15 minutes, okay? Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
see. Well, it's 10:35. Is Ms. Nanasi in the room? Dr. Van Gogh, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, terrific. Thank you. Let's see, is Mr. Dodd in the room, perhaps? All right. This will be very short. We're just waiting for your counsel, Dr. Van Gogh, and then we'll begin the questions. We start with questions from the commissioners, and then we move to questions from the parties. Have me go look for Marielle. Yes. There's Mr. Dodd. Hi, it's time to cross-examine Dr. Van Gogh. Yes. All right. Let's begin with the questions from the commissioners. Commissioner Fry, you have questions of Dr. Van Gogh based on his testimony.
No questions. Yes, no questions.
All right. Commissioner Patton.
Yes, Madam Hearing Officer, I have one or two questions. Dr. Van Gogh, you mentioned, is that too loud? You mentioned that there were studies that have been published related to new chemicals that were found in the treated water and that were not found in raw water. Is that correct?
That was one study that I have seen addressing the Permian oil-produced water for specific treatment technology.
Okay. And is that study listed in any of your testimony?
No,
as a citation?
No, I have not. I discovered it when I was working in it after the written testimony. We can easily provide that study to the committee.
Okay, that would be great. And just generally speaking, what was the nature of those chemicals that were found in the treated water but not in the raw water?
Sure. So it was, we're talking about organic chemical that where I'm trying to find it and to make sure. So there were organic contaminants that were defined as a chronic, some of them we call acute aquatic toxicity. There's some that it's a long list. So basically, there are mentioned that they in this paper, and again, it's not my study, so I'm trying to just be the messenger here. So it's not I take responsibility of that study, but it's important because it's kind of showing what we have shown before that. So that you could induce if one of the treatment it's called photocatalytic membrane distillation. It's in attempt to remove organic, and again we're talking about only the component of organic chemical within oil produced water. During this method, apparently it's a membrane that's going to have also my understanding, warming, kind of heating up the system, you generate a different type of those organic contaminants that were not detected in the raw produced water.
Okay, so most of these chemicals were volatile organics, semi-volatiles, something of that nature.
It is, yes, it is. We're talking all organics. There's no any, this paper did not address any of the inorganic.
Okay.
Commissioner Patton, just for the record, Madam Hearing Officer, Commissioner Patton, just for the record, it's already in NMOGA Exhibit 139.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Vice Chair Armstrong.
Thanks. Thanks for your testimony this morning, Dr. Van Gogh. Your testimony, your rebuttal testimony concludes that without a scientifically based definition of the treatment methods and associated management plans.
Hold on, I'm sorry. It's coming.
Got me to slow down.
It's too fast and it's coming through a little muddle.
Okay. Your rebuttal testimony concludes with a statement that without a scientifically based definition of the treatment methods and the associated management plans designed for oil-produced water from the Permian Basin, the reuse rule poses major risks to the environment and human health.
Correct.
With the revised proposed rule not allowing any discharge of treated or untreated produced water, how do we, and without the rule in general, how do we develop that scientifically based definition of treatment methods that your conclusion seems to state is necessary?
That's,
yeah.
Good. Thank you for this question. That's indeed, I think it is important that a very kind of a detail and when you ask for permission for reuse of oil produced water, one has to provide, I think, a very detailed understanding of what's in it. So you have to get, rather than you have to be very specific of the list of the organics and the inorganics, the metals, the salt, the radionuclide. And so first of all, I think it's what's in the waste stream. And I think it's pretty not clear at that point what are. So you need systematic analysis of what's in the waste, which right now I don't think it's totally complete. So you have to complete that. And based on that, one have to establish a treatment technology from which each of those contaminants is being reduced to the level that is not inducing any environmental and human health effect. And to be specific, for chloride, you need to remove it to concentration of less than 250 milligram per liter, for example, which is the standard for drinking water. For arsenic, you should not have level below 10, above 10 parts per billion, which is the drinking water standard. For ammonium, which is a major issue, you need to make sure that it's below the EPA standard for the aquatic life, which is 0.3 milligram per liter. So for each of the recognized parameters, which is a long list of the constituents in the oil produced water, you need to establish a standard, a benchmark, so to speak, from which the level can be, at that point, can be acceptable for reuse. And once you get there, between them, you have to establish what are the technologies that could be addressing that level. And it's pretty challenging task to be able to remove all the constituents from the starting point, which is the oil produced water, to the end point, which is the standard to be determined for each of the constituents. And again, to be aware that this could be a dynamic rule, because tomorrow another lab will discover PFAS or another constituent that was not aware before. So you can have the capability to be kind of dynamic and add constituents as you move along when you're having this ruling.
Okay, thank you. So you need to know what's in the water, and you need to know, then once you know what's in the water, you need to know what treatment needs to be done to get it down to an appropriate standard. The proposed rule from the department requires a notice of intent process that has been discussed during the hearing. And the notice of intent would require identifying the concentration of water contaminants in the untreated produced water used in the demonstration project or industrial project. Does that get to that first step of telling us what's in the water?
Yes and no. I mean, once you're doing a test in a field type condition, you are putting yourself, the workers, everyone in a bit risk. The last component that I was not mentioned, you need, what do you, in this kind of program, what do you do with the waste and how you manage the waste? So in any experimental, and the experimental should be very well designed and not in a kind of a vague language, but have very specific indication of what constituents are going to be measured, and what level would be to reduce, and what are the treatment technology that's going to be addressed. All this should be very well designed, as well as what do you do with the waste after the treatment. So all that have to be done in a very controlled situation, that you know that if you go to the field and start to do it in a large volume of water, you're putting yourself into a risk that you actually can result in waste that you don't know what to do with it, and possibly damage. So you have to be very careful in making this experimental, either in the lab or in a very small control site that is could make sure that it's protected from the environment. There's no any way of leaking and so on.
Understood. I understand your research is not necessarily in New Mexico, but you've described some significant research that would need to go into identifying what the best path is to treating or identifying standards for water reuse. Is there, like, what authority do you have as a researcher, or would researchers in New Mexico have to do those types of experiments without NMED's proposed regulation?
I don't think that any researcher in New Mexico that taking sample at the lab and doing experiment would violate any rules. I think that should be that's not the question. So when you're doing experimental in your lab, you are any researcher may be able to do that. That should not be a restriction for scientific work, obviously. So, but I think some of the point that is important, we don't need to invent the wheel. There are very clear, there are some, for example, the EPA have a clear indication for what is the aquatic life risk for wastewater. So there are specific standards for what is the level of contaminants you're allowed to have a chronic, for example, disposal in some. So there are some standards, but those standards are not enough. As I mentioned in my testimony, you need to be able to tailor this, because of the long list, because of the complex of the oil produced water. You need to build kind of a matrix of parameters of standard and known to the community from which you can start to be used the truly treated wastewater.
Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Commissioner Dominguez?
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. Good morning, Dr. Vengosh. Thank you for your testimony this morning. You talked about your laboratory and that there's been produced water research done either by yourself or your team in your laboratory. Is that correct?
Yep.
So the waste stream off of that research, how do you dispose of or discharge that waste stream? You've talked about two streams, the clean side and then the waste stream. How do you dispose of that in your laboratory setting?
So we are following a very, Duke University has a very thorough method of using a toxic material. So for example, the radioactive lab that we're having and measuring the radium is strictly controlled and strictly monitored by the Radioactivity Commission in Duke University. All the wastewater that's generated are being disposed into a designated location, including a radioactive designated disposal site, which have, so in the US, if you have, for example, talking about radioactivity, if there's a certain level of radioactivity, those waste, either solid or fluid, should be disposed in this designated radioactive designated landfill, which is designed exactly to receive those kind of material. And we are following very strictly the rules of that. One interesting point in many of our studies in Pennsylvania and West Virginia, when we arrived to a site when it was contaminated, the level of radium that we found in the soil or in the stream was exceeding the level of those the threshold that is required for disposal in those radioactive designated landfill. So in fact, all those sites that were impacted by all produced water, even treated or non-treated, basically should be defined as radioactive waste disposal site. But coming back to your question, in our lab, we were very careful that every waste that is generated is being disposed in the method that Duke is guiding us. And basically, it's going for a disposal site. The important to emphasize that when we're talking about organic material, eventually even oil, when you have an oil spill, the material will be degraded over time. So you can put it and eventually it oxidizes and you get rid of the organics, most of them. Some of them are non-degradable, which is a problem, like the PFAS that we're talking about. But definitely for metals and radioactive material, they are inorganic and there's no way they are degraded. They are here forever and the radioactivities continue to decay. So we're talking about thousands of years of radiation that can be generated. So, so that's why the disposal of waste from all produced water, basically, it's important to understand that the waste is not something that will be degraded just to put it in some place, a pit, and wait for oxidation.
Okay, thank you. This is a little bit of continuation of the questioning from Commissioner Armstrong. In your rebuttal testimony, you indicated credible scientific data is needed to base a regulation on. Is that correct?
Yes.
So part of this proposed rule before us deals with bench scale projects and pilot projects. So, and it seems part of the intent of this rule is to actually gather some of that scientific data that you're indicating is necessary in order to have the proper treatment methods established. But it kind of, from your testimony, we seem to be stuck in a catch-22 here. You're indicating we need the scientific data to create a rule, yet what's before us, part of it is establishing a rule that would allow the creation of that scientific data. So how does the commission handle that challenge? Because we're hearing two different things from technical testimony.
It's a great question. I think and I understand where you're coming from, and I think it's the point that I would like to emphasize that we are now, if we were go back in time 15 years ago when we were start to look at the wastewater coming from fracking and oil produced water, or even 20 years ago, that was the way you defined it would be correct. So we don't know anything, and let's do tests to see what's there and what treatment technology and all that. However, we are 2024, and there is a huge science already established on oil-produced water, including the Permian, and including the study that I mentioned earlier that conducted in your area. So I think it's important that the new ruling would not have an ambiguous kind of language of treated water, but should be very specific, should be already use the science that has been established. And that's what I was meaning. And I hope, and I do appreciate the committee kind of attempt to follow the science, and I believe you are. But the point that I'm trying to make is there is a huge of science already conducted. And the committee should use in the ruling the knowledge that has been established, and based on that, have a ruling that is becoming much more specific and much more addressed, for example, and also would address what are the outcome that you want to come out, because that is really important. Because someone can do a test and say, hey, I remove the organic from X to Y, but ignoring all other constituent, which would kind of miss the point of the committee. So I think the ruling of the committee for the new rule for reuse should already address the established science and established numerous studies. And I'm not talking about my lab, I'm talking about all over the country, people, researchers in New Mexico and others that have some knowledge, that have addressed. And my opinion is that you should use this science in one hand to address what can be the risk specifically. And then another end of the rule should be what are as I mentioned in my other comment, what are the expected level that you should come? And this is, again, very important. Shouldn't be a kind of a treated water. Treated water means nothing. You have to be very specific. The level of arsenic should be below that level. The level of the total organic carbon should be below that certain level. And all that should be established already in the ruling based on the science that we know that those constituents will induce ecological and human health risk. So I think that's my point of how important it is to include the science that has been already established related to the potential risk and the treatment. There are many papers that have addressed different methods of treatment. All that should be included, and the test site that you mentioned should be already equipped to address the risk, because the way it's written now is starting from zero, and you say, let's see how we learn to do that. So we know that many of the things, maybe not all, but we know many of the constituents, many in all produced water. We know some of the methods of treatment that being published. All this should be included. So your ruling should be very explicit and very specific and provide the guideline for the people who are going to carry out this. What's in the wastewater? What are the possible method to treat it? And what is the level you require to put those contaminants to the level from which you can consider to them treated or produced water? And that is missing in this reuse rule.
Okay, as a follow-up question to that, we've heard from other witnesses that have indicated for produced water in New Mexico, we do not know what all the contaminants are and at what level. So again, I'm back to what came first, the chicken or the egg. We're stuck in a hamster wheel here because we're being told set standards for the rule. We have other people telling us we don't know everything about the produced water in New Mexico, and we need to find that out in order to establish the treatment methods. So I hope you understand the dilemma of my questioning.
Sure, and I think it's a great question, and I think so I think there is the way I would address that is to first to evaluate or to summarize what we know, and then once we summarize what we know, we can focus on what we do not know about the constituents in oil produced water. And what can be constituents that coming with it. And for example, I don't want to advise the committee what to do, but I would think, for example, having a workshop of something that invite all major researchers into it and try to build a document that contain what we know and what we don't about the oil produced water. And then give this as a guideline for in your experimental site, which again have to be very carefully monitored and address the waste that's going to generate from it, as I mentioned, but to be able to address, here is the parameter we know that are already established in the literature, and what here are a range of potential contaminant based on the evidence of the scientist community that you can get their input in this workshop or whatever method kind of procedure you would like to have. And from that, this test will obviously examine what we know, but also be aware to have a kind of a screening of potential contaminants that we don't know. So I think as a scientist, I think that would be the fair and way to protect and to ensure that you're doing the best way to do. For the non-contaminants, you already need to establish the the end point. What are the level from which you would like the treatment to get? So that can be established again already for at least the contaminants that we do know exist in the oil produced water. Obviously, we cannot do it for the contaminants we don't know, but for those we do, those guidelines can be established already in this reuse rule. I hope that's addressed your concern.
Thank you, Dr. Van Gogh, Madam Hearing Officer. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you. Chair Thompson?
Thank you. Good morning, Dr. Van Gogh. It's nice to see you.
Thank you.
I very much appreciate all your work in this area. I have quite a few questions. Let's start. One of the statements that has been brought up repeatedly is concerns about PFAS compounds. And you earlier in your testimony, you cited a paper by Jang that was published in Journal of Hazardous Materials, a very exhaustive analysis of inorganics, organics, and they did, as far as I know, it's the only analysis of PFAS compounds in produce water. And you mentioned the paper, so do you recall how many PFAS compounds were detected and at what level?
So again, it's not my paper, so I'm kind of mention it. I need to look at the paper to give you this this result, the actual level of the PFAS level, and what kind of component, because as you know, PFAS is a wide range of component that were found. So I'm sorry, I'm not able to provide direct answer about this study.
That's okay. This particular paper detected 5 PFAS compounds. All of them were at concentrations below 1 nanogram per liter. In fact, most of them were below concentration as with reporting level, which is, has to do with the analytical confidence. So very low concentrations. I don't know that that's a problem. And you also talked a little bit about reuse of municipal wastewater. And so I would like, are you familiar with levels of PFAS compounds in municipal wastewater?
Depends where. There are some discoveries in places in North Carolina, actually, where I live, that PFAS do exist in wastewater. It depends on the cycle of contaminants that coming from agricultural field into river water, which goes in becoming the source of drinking water and goes back into the wastewater and recycle into the treated wastewater. So it depends on sources of PFAS, and North Carolina has been a place where, because of the manufacture of the PFAS, they had high level of PFAS being released to the environment and cause contamination and cause this kind of recycling of its material eventually into the treated wastewater, which go back in, which we use into that. I want to mention the treated wastewater. I've been working on it extensively, not on the PFAS, but on the other issues. And in many cases around the world, the reuse of treated domestic wastewater is problematic, not because of the organic, but because of the salt. And explicitly sodium and explicitly boron, which is a very toxic, could be toxic to plant if you reuse it for agriculture. So even in some places, they found that the reuse of domestic wastewater, just normal wastewater for agriculture, could induce agriculture toxicity in the plant because of the high level of inorganics that not being treated during common treatment. And in some places, you need the additional treatment technology to remove the inorganic on domestic wastewater.
Yes. Let me just go back to PFAS for one moment. It's not a big deal, but are there domestic sources of PFAS in municipal wastewater?
As I said, as far as I know, it would depends on the kind of hydrological system. First of all, you need sources of contamination of PFAS. And apparently PFAS is surrounding us all because we use it in every day in the kitchen and so on. So it's really a very common compound in our life. But I think my understanding that high level of PFAS have been determined only in places where there were manufacturers and therefore there being some bioaccumulation in the ecological system and in this hydrological system that caused this contamination. I don't know about cases in New Mexico.
Thank you. I certainly agree that the highest concentrations are where there are industrial sources. But I believe that, as you said, PFAS is widely used in domestic products. And so there are also domestic sources. So you'll find PFAS, I believe, in almost all domestic wastewaters. But we don't, that's not really an issue. Your student, Miss Osborne, did a study on a treatment system in Texas. It was a produce water treatment system in Texas, and found that there was virtually no removal of any of the constituents that she measured. That she measured inorganics, major ions and anions and cations, and dissolved organic compounds.
Correct.
Now, that was not a desalination process.
Correct.
Is that true?
Yeah. It's not desalination. This we're talking about a system that they're using for basically putting it in a pit and try to get oxidation of the material, trying to get rid of the organic matter, which was not successful. But no, this is definitely not desalination.
So, have you or any of your colleagues examined the performance of plants that were designed to desalinate produced water?
So there was one site that I'm aware of, which is in, I believe in Pennsylvania. I forgot the name. I can check up later to get the actual information, which we didn't study that, but I know that they aim to, and they have desalination, thermal desalination, which meaning heating and the water, the produced water to high temperature and under low vacuum to generate clean water. I know they were operating for a while, and they got permission for disposal in Pennsylvania. We never tested their water. I don't know what's happened to the waste that came, the waste stream that I mentioned, and how this was managed. But I know that they were not, because of the high cost, after some time, a couple of years, they shut down. I don't know, because of performance or because of it was not economic to be in the long term. So personally, I was not engaged in that kind of treatment. I was engaged in other places in Pennsylvania where they treated the water for different types of treatment, not desalination. And I could tell that they similar to what we found in those cases in Texas, they failed to remove the salt. The radioactivity was a bit reduced, but still caused a major environmental impact.
And is water from the Marcellus shale, is that produced water similar in quality to the water from the Permian Basin?
Yes, I mean, there are some variation, and you should know when we talk about the Permian Basin, I think the committee should be aware that it's not one homogeneous water. For example, during hydraulic fracturing, when you start to get flowback water, and it takes about a month to 3 months of a stream of high volume of stream that the industry will call it a flowback water, which would contain a relatively lower salinity but high concentration of organic material, of the fracking additive material that they use. And then over time, the volume and the chemistry of that flowback water becoming what the industry or the literature call produced water, in which the salinity rises and the radioactivity rises and so on. So you can have from the same well a very different type of water chemistry and contaminants that are coming from a well after hydraulic fracturing and during the lifetime of a well. So there's no like one homogeneous composition. So definitely, and similar, the Marcellus Shale having the wastewater having the same kind of evolution over time, and that has been demonstrated by numerous studies, not only our own. And so it's important to understand if a system receives flowback in early stages, it may have lower salinity but high level of organics. Whereas over time, where it's kind of older, so to speak, produced water coming from the well, it will have much higher salinity. So all the treatment technology have to be adjusted to the stream, which will be very heterogeneous in the chemistry because of this variation over time. So it's really important, unless you mix it prior to the mixing to get homogeneous stream of waste. But if you don't do that, you would get huge variation in the chemistry and the concentration of different contaminants. And we have seen this in the Marcellus shale in Pennsylvania and West Virginia.
Thank you. This rule that we're hearing today is in response to legislation that was passed in 2019, the Produced Water Act. And one of the things that the Produced Water Act required was that industry report the source of the water they use for hydraulic fracturing. And to the best of my knowledge, I think New Mexico is the only place where that information is available, where the source of the water that's used for fracking is publicly available. And because of that, the industry has turned away from freshwater use. And today, over 95% of the water used for fracking is produced water. So I appreciate your comments about the variation in chemistry, but it's not as much in New Mexico as it is in other places like the Marcellus. So it's sort of interesting work, and congratulations to our legislature for doing that.
I totally agree. I think it's great. I've seen it in China too. I've been working extensively on fracking issues in China, and indeed once they convert and start to reuse produced water for fracking, the flowback water became saline in day one, unlike what I mentioned before, and therefore, but still, even though you have produced water coming, they would have a bit the salinity would not show variation given the source of the water, which is, again, I kind of congratulate you for doing that, for saving clean water and fresh water from not being used for fracking. But the waste stream, again, will have variation over time in volume and in composition because of the mixing of the flowback water and the original produced water from that well, and not necessarily will be identical. And definitely the organics will be different during the lifetime of this well.
Yes. In your testimony, several places, in your written rebuttal testimony, several places, you recommend that we propose that the rule identify treatment standards and treatment methods. Can you elaborate when you talk about treatment methods? What do you mean there? Are you saying that we should specify what methods are acceptable to treat the produced water?
Yes, I mentioned it in one of the earlier questions that I was asked. I think the rule should include everything we know about all produced water in terms of the range of expected range of salt, range of metals, range of radioactive material, and range of organics, which is very wide range of that what we know, we have seen from the literature that has been established. And then, and this is one end. The other end, the rule would include already specific guidelines of what are the level that should be those reduced from salinity of that range of 300,000 milligram per liter. You have to go down to 250 milligram per liter. I'm taking chloride as an example. So then established from all the list of contaminants, we know what is the threshold from which the treatment should achieve in order to make them reusable. That is really important because otherwise the vague language, everyone can say, hey, I treat the water, I can use it now freely. And that could be disastrous if that happened. You need to be very explicit on what level of contaminants you allow to wastewater to be treated before you can define it as a treated wastewater. And then between those things, you could suggest, again, based on the literature, what are the methods that could be, and make sure that you include in this literature review all method that has been tested or been suggested. As you mentioned, desalination. Desalination would address one type of contaminants, not other. What are the organics? There's the membrane. That's a new technology that emerging now. Could be working with the desalination. So how to build it, kind of to give some ideas, kind of a guidelines to the test what can be done. So that's, and then of course the demonstration or the test site should be having those constraints, should have those guidelines. You need to reduce the contaminants from all produced water to that level in order, that's why you call it successful attempt, and not only one, but all wide range of the contaminants we know existing in all produced water.
So let me see if I understand you correctly. You're saying that we should have numeric criteria for all the contaminants, but we should also identify in the rule, we should identify a portfolio of methods, treatment methods, technologies that the industry should use in treating this water.
I think so. I think it will be making the rule much more robust and would make it more specific and not vague. If in the test site, for example, a new entrepreneur suggests alternative site, alternative method for remediation, you should not rule this out. but at least give this a guideline what the literature has been established. So the point that I want to make, as I made earlier, we are not in the early stage of studies. There is a lot of research has been conducted on treatment technology. So this research should be included, should be addressed, and not starting from day one, we know nothing, let's do a test to see what works and what doesn't. So I think the ruling should be using the already established science to be able to have a much better and more specific addressing, including having this method have been successfully applied, but again, and have some opening if someone have alternative method to want to test. Sure, you should include, not rule this out, obviously, but giving guidelines to what has been done, successfully done, and what's not.
So I'm not aware of any other environmental regulation, whether it's air pollution control or wastewater treatment under the Clean Water Act, or drinking water treatment under the Safe Drinking Water Act. I'm not aware of any regulation that specifies treatment technologies. To the best of my knowledge, they all specify performance standards. In other words, criteria that have to be met by the treated fluid, whether it's air or water. Are there other regulations that I'm not aware of that specify a particular treatment standard, treatment method?
I'm not an environmental lawyer, so I cannot answer that. For me, it seems like a kind of important tool to present the science of that, to make sure that the ruling would be more effective. But one thing I totally agree with you is that the criteria standard should be included, as you said, in this ruling, and therefore so treated wastewater should have a very clear indication. When you say treated, what do you mean? How much you reduce the level and for what constituents, and that should be included. And as you say, that is including in every other clean water or air regulation.
So let's go back to our discussion about municipal wastewater, which is one part of this rule, wastewater reuse. If the water is reused for potable purposes, the treated water has to comply with Safe Drinking Water Act standards. And the Safe Drinking Water Act regulates about 100 parameters, both inorganics, organics, radioactive constituents, and pathogenic organisms. So there's about 100 constituents that are regulated. So my question is, let's talk first about municipal wastewater reuse. Are those standards sufficiently protective of human health and the environment so that we could adopt those for our wastewater reuse regulations? So
again, it depends on what you're talking about. If you're talking about domestic wastewater, and you have to be explicit about that, you can, yes, and not mix it with all produced water. I think this method could be correct. However, I would warn you that some of the parameters that are good for human health may be not good for plant. Plant have different toxicity kind of sensitivity, like as I mentioned, boron, which is enriched in domestic wastewater. And boron is not included in the drinking water regulation because it doesn't have human health effect, but it could have a severe toxicity effect on plant. And the most common use of domestic treated wastewater is irrigation. And therefore, one has to think to include also agriculture standard of sodium and boron, for example, into that to make sure that the ability to reuse it for agriculture would not cause any damage. So that will be my 2 cents kind of advice for when you're explicitly talking about domestic wastewater and you separate that from the ruling regarding oil produced water.
Yeah, again, this proposed rule has 3 parts, and I'm just talking about reuse of domestic wastewater. And I appreciate the comment about boron. Are you familiar with whole effluent toxicity testing? They're sometimes called wet testing.
I'm not sure about.
Wet testing uses, you take the treated effluent and you expose it to a particular organism. Typically, they're using Daphnia water fleas
Yes.
or a fathead minnow. And so that is one way that the regulators deal with some of the unregulated constituents that might be problematic. But, you know, there are a lot of constituents in domestic wastewater that are not removed by conventional wastewater treatment.
Correct.
So, for instance, pharmaceuticals and personal care products, PFAS,
and all the inorganic,
and many types of organics. That's
No,
true.
no, the
And
inorganic.
inorganics.
right?
Yes.
Like the boron, for example, that we mentioned.
Boron.
Yep.
So the follow-up question is, if the regulations under the Safe Drinking Water Act are sufficiently protective to allow human consumption of the treated wastewater, couldn't we just use those same regulations, those same standards, those same criteria for treated produced water?
No, because produced water contain a larger, you're talking about oil produced water?
I'm talking about Permian Basin produced water.
So now we move into that. So as we said before in my testimony too, there are many constituents that are not mentioned in the Clean Drinking Water Act that should be addressed. So yes, so let me put it this way. On the first layer of protection, the drinking water regulation should be, as you mentioned, the 120 constituents should be the first kind of layers of protection. And then, but above that, one has to look at constituents that are not common in normal or common water that coming from oil produced water, and make sure that the drinking water regulation address those constituents. Because that's kind of what I mentioned. The putting in the same basket as domestic wastewater is a mistake, is incorrect. You have to separate that to a different category. And as we talked about, the treatment should be totally very different. And by the way, just to mention, when you talk about all domestic wastewater, different municipalities, like in California, they use wastewater for drinking water. And the way they do that, they have a tertiary treatment that includes desalination after the conventional second treatment. So the ability to reuse domestic wastewater, like in California, is allowed only after another level of treatment, which includes desalination, and sometimes also mixing this desalted water with natural water, before it can come into the drinking water. But putting that in the same basket of all produced water it's problematic because we're talking about the different types of contaminants and risk.
But couldn't I make the same argument about domestic wastewater? I mean, we don't regulate personal care products. We don't regulate well, we do regulate herbicides. Let's just stick with personal care products.
That's a problem. One has to do that.
That does not show up. We don't have personal care products in produce water. And yet California has the most restrictive wastewater reuse regulations in this country that I'm aware of. There are only a couple of states that have wastewater reuse regulations for potable use. They do not regulate personal care products.
So there is a gap in the system that one has to fix, I guess. But again, if you're talking about let's focus on domestic wastewater that you mentioned. Yes, they may contain some constituents that escape the treatment and not being regulated by the Clean Water Act. But obviously, the normal treatment, the secondary treatment procedure that we have for domestic wastewater is not sufficient to make this water usable for drinking water. And that's why California is having the desalination stage of that. I'm not seeing any place on earth that people are using domestic wastewater for drinking water. They're using for agriculture, but for drinking water without additional treatment, mostly by desalination, I'm not familiar for any case anywhere. I'm not talking about regulation, I'm talking about practice. So in any way, you need to have additional treatment for domestic wastewater in order to make them usable as drinking water. Now, reuse can be used for agriculture and irrigation or animal feed. That's a total different ballgame. And again, one has to make sure that you're not contaminated streams, you're not causing ecological issues. But I totally agree with you that having those drugs constituents in the waste, which is obviously a human health problem, should not be discharged into the environment. And this is a gap that we are living across the country with that.
And again, I'm only focusing on reuse. There are a number of communities in the U.S. that have what's called direct potable reuse. And I'm not going to go into it, but direct potable reuse has been practiced for several decades in parts of the world. So the Water Quality Control Commission has adopted standards for irrigation. So I can pose the same question if industry built a plant that treated produced water from the Permian Basin to meet the criteria for irrigation, the TDS, the ammonia, the metals concentration, the rad. Is that sufficiently protective of our irrigated crops?
No, because when they established those rules, they did not have the knowledge of what's in the produced water, in the oil produced water. So those standards are kind of addressed common contaminants that we know in the environment. They address some of the metals that you mentioned, but they don't address, I'm not sure they have radioactivity, for example. I'm sure they don't. And because a common water would not have high level of radium that you see in oil produced water. And we have very good evidence that irrigation with water with high radium would cause radium accumulation in the soil and causing this to becoming a radioactive disposal site, as we've seen in so many cases. So using the common the available standard that we have today for irrigation is not sufficient to protect the soil, the crops, and the people who are working there from the hazard in oil-produced water.
Okay. I'm almost done.
Great question. I love it.
Well, you know, again, I'm not familiar with any federal regs that are specific to a particular type of wastewater. You know, they have numeric standards for treated wastewater, for drinking water, but it doesn't depend on the source of that water. And so I'm wondering why we need to do it for this one particular type of wastewater, not for industrial wastewater, not for municipal wastewater as well.
So the answer for that is, I can give you an example from the eastern part of the US, and apparently it's also in New Mexico, is coal ash. Okay, so coal ash is the residual material after coal combustion, and it's contained elevated level of metals, arsenic, selenium, and radium, not as much as oil-produced water. And over years, it has not been regulated. And the regulation for disposal of water, of effluents from coal ash impoundment ponds was using the normal wastewater standard. But now, after some years of my group and others that investigated it, showing the huge environmental and human health effect of coal ash, and as a result, after a delay of 50 years, the EPA now woke up and start to have limitation of the disposal of coal ash, how you build the impoundment, the coal ash impoundment, the landfill, and so on. So, it was exactly the same situation. The authority was using the normal the common standards that you would use, nitrate, ammonium, standards that are not relevant to coal ash. And that's my major point. You need to establish standards that address the problem. And the current standard that we have, either for irrigation on field, either for drinking water, are not specifically address the contaminants that we know. It's not like surprising, it's not like a mystery. We know existing in oil-produced water. So you don't want to wake up in 20 years from now, like now we're doing in many parts of the country because of the coal ash, and realize that you have contaminated the people. They put the coal ash in different places. Now they're finding it near daycares in North Carolina. People find it below their homes. There are issues of a cancer cluster in Morrisville in North Carolina. There's many issues they are discovering now about the coal ash, which if you have established correct standard when you start to 50 years ago, you would avoid all that. And we are in this junction right now in New Mexico. You can prevent the future disaster that, if you don't do the ruling correctly, it's inevitably going to happen.
Thank you. My last line of questioning, the proposed rule addresses bench scale and pilot scale treatment. It does not address full scale treatment. And as in its current form, it does not allow discharge of the treated effluent offsite, away from the oil and gas industry. So I could not use that water to augment a public water supply, or I could not use it for growing crops. It seems to me that we need a rule that will allow pilot plant testing because we need to develop technologies for dealing with this waste. It's a very large volume of waste. It's difficult to manage. So are you arguing that we should not allow pilot testing, even though the water is completely contained within the industry?
So I would say I would be very careful in that. So what I would say, when you're doing a pilot testing, you need to be very specific on, again, as I mentioned, what are the level you want to achieve, and you want how you manage the waste, because you're generating, even in this pilot, you generate a high concentration of waste stream with radioactivity and all that. So, and that's something that you have to be addressed in the ruling to make sure that the waste is being correctly addressed. And then the question is, what do you do with this treated wastewater in your pilot? How you get rid of it after that? That also should be kind of part of the, I would say, proposal of those entities that are going to do that. And I would say something very important. When you're doing this testing, who is going to do that, and who's going to monitor the effectiveness of that, and how you make sure that the science is there and not commercial interest? And that's something very important the committee should put into understanding, to give some kind of a third-party observation for the successful of those sites. And again, all this should be laid out in the ruling and should be like an amendment or whatever to make sure that that kind of test site addresses all the contaminants, addresses all the standard that you wish to get. Have some suggestions for the treatment technology, even though it's not normal procedure, but also have assignment of a third party to be monitoring the performance of this kind of in a way to make sure that it's not being controlled by any commercial or kind of interest behind the mere important scientific value of that.
Okay, you brought up 2 points. The way I envision a pilot test being done would be that it would be done at the site of one of these storage facilities. And we're talking about ponds that are hundreds of acres of produce water. They use evaporation to concentrate it some, and that the waste would be, the feed water would consist of water from the pond. So it would be homogeneous. We wouldn't have to deal with the high variability that you might exist.
Mm-hmm.
And the waste would not be allowed to be discharged, neither the residuals from the treatment process nor the treated water would not be allowed to be discharged outside of the industry. So presumably the most expedient thing would be to take that treated water and dump it back into the pond, but they might use it on site or something, I don't know. But it would never leave ownership of the oil and gas industry.
So that's a problem, because you let the cat control, the, how you say it, the milk. You need to have a way to, I understand it have to be on site, but it's part of the ruling that a third party, university or academic, which is not controlled by the industry, should be part of this mission. You cannot allow with all the respect to the oil and gas industry and the capability, they have interest in that. And so the ruling should make sure that if you're doing a test like this, it should be monitored by an independent entity that is allowed to go into the property of oil and gas area and monitor what they're doing and looking at the data and maybe even conducting independent analysis of the outcome to make sure that the data is adequate, comprehensive as it should be.
You know, that troubles me. One of the fundamental principles of all regulations that I'm aware of, again, air, solid waste, and water regulations, both drinking water and wastewater, is the concept of self-monitoring. Now, the regulatory agency has the option to come in and collect samples and confirm, but almost all of our regulatory programs allow the constituent to monitor their own performance. They report it. Generally, it's reported in a public forum, website or something like that. But the idea of having third-party verification is unusual in my experience.
Well, yeah, true. And we see the disaster of the coal ash in North Carolina as a result of this self-monitoring. And many other cases across the US, also the disposal and spill of hundreds of sites in North Dakota. And so I argue that this self-monitoring is extremely problematic. But the point that for you, you're talking about a test site. You're talking about not a kind of experimental you want the industry to conduct to see how you make the produced water, which I understand the major problem, to be perhaps usable. But so this experiment require additional tools and additional way to look at it. It's not like you have a regulation for disposal or something like that. This regulation, the reuse, is explicitly want to take wastewater from the Permian Basin and try to see how that can be usable. And you kind of allowing this test site in the vicinity of the oil and gas industry. If the industry is not allowing you to have a third party monitoring, something is problematic here. And something why they're not why this is not open should not be verified by a third party. So for me, given that because of this is experimental kind of regulation, it's not a normal regulation of just what is the level of contaminant that allowed to be disposed, but rather let's try and see how we can convert oil produced water to usable water. This kind of experiment need to be tested and be evaluated by some verification rather than the owner of those oil produced water.
Thank you. You know, you started earlier, you were describing the peer review process. And I thought that was very well done. But I would note that I've never experienced a third party actually collecting samples or taking aliquots of my samples and sharing them and doing an independent analysis of any of the experimental work that I've ever done. So,
well, we did it, for example, after the spill of the TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, in 2009, there was regulation by the Tennessee commissioner and the similar committee of you to allow academic institutions to monitor the impact of the oil coal ash spill. And indeed, we split sample with the TVA authority that we conduct a parallel study. So it's not the first time that this can be conducted. This was after a spill, a kind of a unique situation.
Yes.
But I can see a similarity to you because you're doing experimental kind of work.
Yes, well, I think there's a big difference between a spill and running a pilot plant. Dr. Van Gogh, thank you very much. It's been a very stimulating conversation.
Thank you.
Madam Hearing Officer.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Bayless, do you have questions of Dr. Van Gogh? Thank you. Commissioner Brankard.
Thank you. I just have one, Dr. Van Gogh. Thank you very much. I was trying to look at the master's thesis that you referenced, but I'm having a hard time linking up to it. Duke University doesn't like me. They say I'm invalid.
We can,
So
I believe we can have the PDF of it and provide this to you if needed.
anyway, I just had one question from that study, which was the water was being treated at this facility, if you know, for what use?
I don't know it that I don't know if and what what was the use of that treated wastewater from that site.
Thank you. And then I just have one correction for the chair. The requirement that companies are to provide the source of water for drilling is a regulatory requirement of the Oil Conservation Commission. It is not from the Produced Water Act.
I'm going to have to swear you all in. Okay. Commissioner Vehil.
I have no questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We have two commissioners on the platform. Commissioner Rosatos.
Good morning, Madam Hearing Officer. I do not have any questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And Commissioner McWilliams. Commissioner McWilliams, she may have stepped away. Okay, we are 3 minutes from noon. We return at 1 for our second public comment session of the day. Let's take the lunch hour until 1. We do have many names for the 1 o'clock public comment session, just FYI. Thank you. Can I just, Dr. Van Gogh, we are going to lunch now, and then there's public comment at 1. And I'm hoping that you're going to be available for cross-examination by the other parties, probably around 1:30 or 1:40. I don't know exactly. Is that about right? Do you think, Madam Hearing Officer? Are you going to still be available after that?
Sure. Yes.
Thank you.